welcome back to the podcast history of our world. Chapter 31, Prophets and Kings. When Cyrus died in 530 BC, he had won the Persians the world's largest empire to date. And through a system of careful management and cultural tolerance, he ensured that his earthly gains would survive long after he was gone. But great empires aren't just built with the sword and shield. What about the people's souls, their need for spirituality, for purpose? Surely there's more to life than just conquering your enemies and hearing the lamentations of their women. Well, maybe that was good enough if you were a Sumerian, but for the Persians of the 6th century BC, a new faith was spreading throughout the empire with a simple but alluring message. There is but one God who dwells in heaven and rewards the good and just with eternal salvation. But for the wicked and evil, everlasting damnation awaits in a realm of darkness ruled by a terrifying devil. Sound kinda familiar? It should, as the faith preached by Zarathustra's Pitama was known to the Greek world, and passed on later to the Christian converts. In fact, the priests of Zoroastrianism, the Magi or Magi, who are keen astrologers, have a direct connection to Christianity. 3 Magi in particular used their knowledge of the stars to supposedly make their way to Bethlehem and identify the young king of the Jews. But what of the founder of this religion, Zarathustra, also called Zoroaster? Who is he and what's his deal? A good place to start is trying to decipher when he was born. If you believe the Greeks, then you'd know he was born in 6000 BC, which would put him beyond the beginnings of civilization in Sumer. Of course, if writers like Plutarch had just asked the Zoroastrians what they thought, they'd know that tradition places Zarathustra 258 years before Alexander's conquest of Persia, dating his birth to around 628 BC. As with many prophets, the details of his birth are iffy. Some say he was born in the city of Ray, now a suburb of Tehran, others that he was born in southwestern Afghanistan. Much of his life is a mystery, and what we do know of him comes from oral tradition and the holy text of the Zoroastrians, the Avesta. Its current form was saved by the fiercely Zoroastrian Sasanian Empire, who adapted it from the original version. That master copy, supposedly written on vellum and gold ink, was lost in another act of historical tragedy, as when Persepolis was burned in 330 BC by Alexander's soldiers, it went up in flames too. But here's what we do know about him. We can infer from his family name Spitama that he came from a long line of Aryan priests, who bore that name and worshipped the many gods of the Vedic pantheon, including Mithra, Indra, and Agni. At some point in his early 20s, he received a powerful vision from a new deity, and he recorded the encounter in the Gathas, or hymns of the Avesta. He writes, "As the Holy One I recognized thee, Ahura Mazda, when good thought came to me and asked me, 'Who art thou? To whom dost thou belong? By what signs wilt thou appoint the days for questioning about thy possessions and thyself?' I said to him, 'To the first question, Zarathustra am I, a true foe to the liar, to the utmost of my power. But a powerful support would I be to the righteous, that I may attain the future things of the infinite dominion, according as I praise and sing thee, O Mazda.' He had encountered the one and only God, Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord. From him he learned that the gods he was used to worshipping, the old Vedic gods, were not only false, but they were devas, demons. These fake gods were everywhere on earth, commanded by their evil leader Angra Mainyu to seek out and corrupt mankind through treachery and temptation. But the greatest evil they could commit was the lie. Lying is how the devas would convince humanity to follow them into evil and away from Ahura Mazda. So what's an honest person to do? To faithfully follow Ahura Mazda, one must do 3 things: have good thoughts, speak good words, and do good deeds. And above all, never ever lie. Lying is the worst sin, as each lie is another step down the path to darkness, bringing you ever closer to Angra Mainyu. If you lead a good life of helping others and seeking the truth, then Ahura Mazda will welcome you into his heavenly realm, where one day he will lead the attack against the forces of evil and crush them. But this epic battle is not predetermined. You are free to control your destiny and pick your own side. Just be prepared to accept responsibility in the afterlife, because the worse your sins are on earth, the worse your punishment in hell will be. In addition to these 3 basic tenets, the Zoroastrian is also concerned with purity, not just of spirit, but of the body and the earth. To this is where the famous fire worship comes into play, as fire burns away impurities and banishes the darkness. Nothing can hide in the light of a flame, and so the element is a powerful symbol for good. The other components of the world also take on a vital role, including water, which is more valuable than gold in the hot Iranian steppes, and earth, which must never be polluted by burying a body in it, nor through cremation, which would pollute the flames. It's from this reasoning that Zoroastrians treated their dead in a very different way than other cultures. They would construct massive raised circular structures called dakma in Persian, sometimes translated as towers of silence. From there, the deceased is left exposed to the sun and, more importantly, to vultures, who would pick the corpse clean. It's actually pretty ecologically sound when you think about it, kind of a whole circle of life thing. Nowadays, if you choose the burial route, all those embalming chemicals can leach into groundwater, and high-end coffins are specifically made of materials not to decompose, and not to mention all the land set aside for graveyards. This other way is a bit more gruesome, but it gets the job done with no muss and no fuss. Except good luck convincing a zoning board to get a building permit. Somehow, I just don't see that happening. Anyway, Zarathustra tried to spread his new faith wherever he could, but initially could only convince his cousin to convert. Not a good start. He didn't experience success until about 588 BC, when he convinced the consort of King Vishtashpa, ruler of a kingdom somewhere south of the Aral Sea, to join him. Once she had converted, he did too, as well as many of his nobles. Vishtashpa proved to be a key convert, as he came from the same family lineage as Cyrus, descending from the early Persian king Achaemenes. When Cyrus arrived in his kingdom offering a chance to join the empire, Vishtashpa agreed, becoming ruler or satrap of the newly formed province of Bactria. But before that happened, Zarathustra was an honored guest at his court, whose message was really catching on with both noble and commoner alike. Unfortunately, while preaching in the ancient city of Balkh, located in northern Afghanistan, Zarathustra is killed by Central Asian nomads at the age of 77 in 551 BC. Only a year before that fateful date, a son was born to Vishtashpa named Darius, an ambitious boy who would really take a shine to the deceased prophet's words. 20 years later, in 530 BC, Vishtashpa would return from the disastrous battle against the Masagatai, and Darius, also called Darius, would be sent down to Babylon to meet up with Cyrus's heir and new Shah of the Persian Empire, the 29-year-old Kambises II. Cambyses was with his dad when Babylon was liberated, and was explicitly mentioned on the Cyrus cylinder as his son and loyal servant of Marduk, Nabu, and the other gods of the Babylonians. But just to make sure no one was in doubt, before Cyrus had marched off for war in the east, he had named Cambyses as his successor, just in case something happened to him. Of course, now that the son was king, he had some pretty big shoes to fill. It wouldn't do to just kick back and relax. He needed to prove himself as great or greater than Cyrus. And since Dad had already taken out 3 of the 4 great empires of the 500s Near East, that just left one more: Egypt. But Cambyses wouldn't just march right in there and grab it. He would continue the tradition of his father's non-aggressive aggression. The Egyptians would give him a reason to go to war, even if they didn't want to. He does this first by requesting an oculist, or ophthalmologist, from the current pharaoh Ahmose II, who complies with this. The physician, resenting how he had been torn from his family to serve the whims of a foreign king, decided to take revenge on the pharaoh through his new Persian employer. He told Cambyses to ask for the pharaoh's daughter to marry, knowing that consent meant the 2 kingdoms would be united, but refusal would mean war. Cambyses liked this plan a lot, and sent the request to Ahmose. The pharaoh stalled as long as he could before deciding on a third, stranger option. His plan was to gussy up the daughter of the previous pharaoh, Apries, and pass her off as his own. Now there's a big problem with this plan. Apries, by the way, is the same Apries who unsuccessfully fought the Babylonians at Jerusalem in 588, and couldn't save the Judeans from destruction. The rest of his reign was spent quelling Libyan uprisings in the west and launching expeditions to Cyprus and Phoenicia, until an Egyptian rebellion toppled him from power, led by the popular general, wait for it, Ahmose. The old pharaoh is killed in battle, and Ahmose II becomes pharaoh of Egypt around 570 BC. So why he thought the daughter of the man he had killed would go along with this little scheme, I don't know. But as soon as she arrives in Cambyses' court, she reveals the trickery of the pharaoh, and the Persian king flips out and makes ready for war. The invasion, led by the veteran Persian warriors, would be joined by the navies of the Cypriots and Phoenicians, as well as soldiers from the newly acquired Greek Ionian cities. In addition to this mighty force, Cambyses was significantly helped by another dissident of the Egyptians, Phanes of Halicarnassus. He was commander of Amos's Greek mercenaries, and he had previously had a falling out with the pharaoh. The arrival of the Persians was his chance to escape and seek revenge. As a high-level military officer, he was privy to a wealth of information on the Egyptians, including what kinds of defenses to expect and the size of Pharaoh's forces. He also recommended that Cambyses seek out peaceful diplomatic relations with the Nabatean Arabs of what is now southern Jordan. The quickest land route into Egypt was through the Sinai Peninsula, and that meant traveling through miles of hot, windswept desert. The local Arabs, however, knew how to transport water in camel skin bags, and ensured the Persians were stocked up, allowing Cambyses' army to make the trip safely and without delay. As the Persian king drew closer to the eastern delta of the Nile, he had learned that Ahmose had died after a reign of nearly 40 years, and that his son Psamtik III had taken the throne. The young and inexperienced pharaoh's reign was already off to an inauspicious start, as during his coronation at Thebes it began to rain, an event that almost never happens. The people were worried. This clearly meant only dark things for Egypt. But Psamtik brushed off his doubters and raced off towards the fortress at Pelusium, located on the eastern fringe of the Nile Delta. There the two great armies would meet, but not before a little ancient world brutality went down. The Greek mercenaries that Phanes had abandoned were enraged over their commander's betrayal, and making their way to the Persian camp, stopped just close enough to where they could be seen, and set down 2 large drinking bowls on the ground. Then they brought forth Phanes' 2 sons, whom he had abandoned in his escape. The Greeks suspended them over the bowls, slit their throats, and collected the blood, which was then mixed with wine and drunk by the soldiers. Phanes was grief-stricken over such cruelty, but Cambyses was unmoved. He was more interested in tactics and strategy than in war theater. The Egyptians were strong, but then again so were the Lydians. The latter had a weakness for relying too much on horse cavalry, to which Cyrus countered with camels. If there was only something Cambyses could exploit in the Egyptians. And then he had it. The answer was cats. We all know Egyptians loved their feline friends, from the cat-headed goddesses to the numerous mummified remains of pets found in temples and graves. In fact, they were so revered that when a pet cat died, the owners would shave off their eyebrows as a public sign of grief. And it was even said that if a building was on fire, it was more important to get the cats out first than the people. Knowing all this, Cambyses prepares his offensive by first having the image of Bastet, the cat-headed goddess, painted on all his soldiers' shields. Her image was deeply sacred to the Egyptians, and to defile it in any way was considered a mortal sin. So when the Persians and Egyptians met on the battlefield, the Egyptians fled for fear of damaging their goddess, leaving the Greek mercenaries to fight to the last man. The fleeing Egyptians locked themselves up at Pelusium, but taking the fortress city would also not be difficult for Cambyses. As he approached, he unleashed a torrent of sacred animals in front of his soldiers. Dogs, cats, ibises, sheep, you name it, he had it. The defenders couldn't risk shooting at the Persians without shooting at an animal, and the city eventually gave up. The Egyptians more concerned with their lot in the afterlife than their lot in this world. It is said that upon entering the city and viewing the prisoners, Cambyses burst into laughter and hurled cats at them, mocking their futility. The city was his, but Psamtik had fled all the way to Memphis in a last-ditch attempt to save his country. To negotiate a peace treaty, Cambyses sends a ship bearing Ionian Greeks into the city, but the Egyptians storm the ship, seizing all aboard and tearing them apart, limb by limb. The Persian king is outraged at this offense, and finally arrives to lay siege. Memphis surrenders shortly thereafter, and his wrath is unleashed. Psamtik's family is imprisoned and sold into slavery, as 2,000 Egyptians are condemned to die for the murder of his envoys. Yet just as his father had a twinge of mercy with Croesus, Cambyses feels the same way with Psamtik, after watching the fallen pharaoh bemoan the fate of an old servant. Psamtik is released and treated as a very important hostage. He might have even become satrap of Egypt if he had played his cards right, but no more than a year after his capture, he attempts a rebellion against the king and is sentenced to death, from overdose of drinking too much bull's blood. Ugh. Now, in 525 BC, Cambyses was declared pharaoh of Egypt, and though the country had seen foreign pharaohs before, there was the dynasty of Nubian pharaohs, as well as those usurper Hyksos, this was it. Psamtik III's 6-month reign was the last time Egypt would be an independent state for nearly 1,500 years, depending on whether you go with Ayyubid Egypt or Mamluk Egypt as the next period of independent rule. From this great victory, Cambyses had finished the job his father had started, and brought all 4 great empires under one Persian banner. But he was not finished. Matching his father's energy for conquest, Cambyses sets out to attempt 3 new campaigns, but all will fail. He wants to go after the profitable trading port of Carthage, but his Phoenician navy refuses to attack their sister colony. For their loyalty and service during the attack on Egypt, Cambyses acquiesces to their wishes and abandons that plan. Next up, he sends a massive contingent of soldiers towards the temple of Amon at the Siwa Oasis, way off in the deserts of western Egypt. The priests there had significant pull with the populace and refused to acknowledge him as pharaoh, so he set about to destroy their little town. Except of the supposedly 50,000 soldiers he sent to do the job, not a single one came back, destroyed, it is said, by a massive sandstorm. There's always rumors going about that some archaeologist has found the remains of this massive army, but so far the evidence is inconclusive. The last of Cambyses' military ventures was the invasion of Kush, but because his soldiers were ill-equipped to fight in the deserts of Sudan, he gets no further than the Second Cataract, and cuts his losses by setting up a trading outpost with the Kushites. Figuring it was better to quit while he was still ahead, Cambyses stops going on the offensive and sets up 3 Persian forts at Memphis, Tapanes, and Elephantine. That last fort is particularly interesting because it was defended almost exclusively by Jewish soldiers, who set up a thriving community there mixing Yahweh worship alongside local worship of the ram's-headed god Khnum. Manuscripts written on papyrus from this era were discovered in the 1800s and provide a fascinating glimpse into this unique society. Confident the proper defenses had been put in place, Cambyses took the years following the conquest of Egypt to settle down and enjoy his new position as Lord of the Nile. He took on as chief advisor the former admiral of Ahmos's navy, a man named Wejah-Horesne, who had probably defected to the Persians sometime during Psamtik's initial resistance. Bestowing upon Cambyses the title of Mesuti Ra, or Born of Ra, Wejah-Horesne reports that he should be thanked and not demonized for showing the Persian king how to run Egypt. He convinced Cambyses to move a Persian garrison out of the holy city of Sais and away from the holy temple of Neith, a mother goddess. This the king agreed to, and then even made a visit to worship and participate in a ceremony there, much like Cyrus did at Babylon with Marduk. However, other temples in Egypt were not as fortunate, as Cambyses really disliked the priests there, who he felt taxed the people too much for their services. He sends out messages to his officials with these instructions. Of the cattle that once were given by the people to the temples of the gods, let them give only half of it. Regarding the poultry, give not to them. Let the priests raise geese and give them to their gods. You can imagine the priests were none too thrilled with this arrangement, but aside from the temple of Neith, only one other temple is reported to have been exempt from this, untax? And that's the temple of Yahweh at Elephantine, whose members boasted how they remained untouched while the gods of Egypt were overthrown. From these accounts, Cambyses appears to have learned much from the campaigns of his father, respecting the conquered, adapting to their ways, and being fair and merciful to the people. So what can we make of these other stories of Cambyses, the ones which describe his madness? In the holy city of Sais, whose temple he had spared, he found the fresh mummy of Ahmos II and ordered it stabbed and mangled until it was no longer recognizable, after which he had it burned. Such an act was offensive to both cultures, in that a mummy should never be defiled, and that, as we discussed earlier, fire should never be polluted through cremation. After this incident, he went back to Memphis to kill the Apis bull, a physical manifestation of the god Ptah, after he had a bout of jealousy towards the sacred animal. And then there's the stories of how he treated his own people. Feeling a bit self-loathing one day, he calls for a courtier of his named Prexipes, who forced him to reveal what the Persian people really thought of their king. Prexipes nervously told him that his people felt he was a good king, but that he drank too much and would lose his mind. Cambyses reportedly told the courtier to get his son and have him stand against the wall. The king then grabbed his bow and arrow and said, If I shoot him through the middle of the heart, I shall have proved the Persians' words empty. If I miss, then say, if you will, the Persians are right, and my wits are gone. He shoots the poor boy through the chest, and then orders him cut open and examined. With a laugh, he says, "There's your proof. I am sane, and the Persians are mad. Now tell me if you ever saw anyone else shoot so straight." In another less mirth-filled example, Cambyses was also known for meting out harsh punishments, such as the kind inflicted on a corrupt judge named Sisamnes. The man had accepted a bribe and given an unjust verdict. Cambyses ordered him to be flayed alive, and his skin used to upholster the judge's throne. Cambyses next appointed Sisamnes' son, Otanes, as the new judge, warning him not to forget what his chair was made of when delivering judgments. So what's the truth? Had he really graduated from Crazy Go Nuts University? Herodotus reports that he was afflicted with the sacred sickness, but that's commonly used to refer to epilepsy, and that doesn't turn you into a sadist. Herodotus is our main reporter for many of these stories, but we must also acknowledge that they came to him by way of Egyptian priests who still resented their loss of power. His Egyptian advisor, Wajaharesne, painted a pretty different picture of Cambyses, and Babylonian and later Persian inscriptions also don't mention any strange behaviors or overt acts of tyranny. Honestly, from the years 525 to 522 BC, we just don't know that much about him. Yet, mad or not, Cambyses' reign in Egypt came to a screeching halt when he learned that back in Persia, his brother Bardia had declared himself the rightful heir of Cyrus and true king of the Persians. Now this was pretty confusing to Cambyses, especially since that before he went off to Egypt, he had his brother secretly killed to avoid a situation like this. Well, whoever this imposter is just asking for trouble. But according to the stories, when Cambyses mounted his horse to begin the march home, the metal cap at the end of his scabbard popped off, causing his sword to slide out, slicing his thigh to the bone. A few days later, gangrene had set in and the infection had spread. And sometime in early 522 BC, Cambyses II, second king of the Persian Empire, was dead after a reign of about 8 years. Next time on the podcast History of Our World, we'll be following the events of what took place following this sudden change in Persian kingship, but specifically following the activities of Cambyses' personal spear-bearer, the 28-year-old Darius. As he and the rest of Cambyses' men make the journey back from Egypt to the old Elamite capital at Susa, where the new king reigned, Darius seemed oddly calm for someone who had just lost his sovereign ruler. Now surely no one suspected him of anything but wanting swift justice for this vile betrayer, but no one could also know that underneath Darius's cool exterior beat the heart of a man with big plans for the empire. Cambyses was a failure, not worthy to carry on his father's work. Only a true Achaemenid could take on what Cyrus had created and unlock its full potential. The empire would be his by the blessings of Ahura Mazda, even if he had to lie to do it.
If you'd like to immerse yourself further in ancient Persia, visit the culinary website Pass the Garum. Chef historian Neil George is recreating the food of antiquity, and that includes an actual recipe for a dish called Parthian chicken. Made with red wine, cumin, fennel seed, and just a touch of date paste, it's an authentic meal fit for a shah. Visit passthegarum.co.uk for more information.